last time he was on. We've asked him to come back. Last time you were on the show, Matt, I'm just trying to find your microphone. Speak to me. Hello.
Hello.
We were speaking about white privilege.
Yeah.
Now, you'd posted this thing, or I don't know how to describe it. You were asking for people's opinion on what white privilege.
So,
can you explain a little bit?
I mean, the motivation behind it,
Yeah.
and what. So, I mean, white privilege is something that is talked about. I was going to say quite a lot. It's talked about quite a lot in my circles. I don't know if it's talked a lot generally.
Well, no, I don't think it is, which is why there was such an incredible response.
Well, I think people are aware of it.
Yeah, of course.
And, you know, I think people of colour are much more aware of it than white people. In fact, white people tend to deny that it exists. White privilege. Oh, gosh, I had to work hard to get to where I am today, and all that kind of reaction to it, which is actually nonsensical because it misses the point around what white privilege is, and it's the fact that, as the title suggests, we have privilege simply because we're white. And I think it needs a little bit of qualification as well, particularly if I start talking about whiteness, which is a slightly expanded notion, because that is gendered and classed as well. So see, if you're white, male and middle class like me, then I have the ultimate amount of privilege that anybody could get in this society because of those three factors. But what I wanted to do was, I wanted to compile some kind of a list of examples of white privilege. But as we were saying before while the music was on, being white, male and middle class, I don't really, it's hard for me to identify it in some ways because I am those things. It's kind of natural, it's there, it's unspoken, it's natural in inverted commas for me because that's who I am. And it also felt a little bit wrong that a white middle class guy should be putting together what, you know, not a definitive list, but a list of white privilege. So basically I thought, well, let's put it out there, let's get other people, see if I can get other people to contribute to this list. And I think I started off with maybe 7 or 8 or 9 examples that I knew of on this list, and just put it on Facebook and shared it in various groups and on various pages and said, look, let's co-create a list of examples of white privilege. Please, let me know, put in the comments what your examples are. And the end result was, what is it, approximately 3 or 4 sides of A4. It's
there's hundreds.
100 plus examples.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is it's shocking in some ways, and I would hope that any white middle class person, any white person full stop, that saw that, let alone read through and just saw the length of it, would be shocked and horrified that actually there are so many different examples. And I don't think for a second this is an exhaustive list. I'm sure there are other examples that we could add to it. But I think more than just shocking people, but we want to educate people. Part of what I do is about trying to get other white people to open their eyes, to be self-reflective, as I was saying, be self-critical, have a look at yourselves, check your unconscious biases, check your thought processes. And I think this is potentially a tool, an educational tool that we could use to do some of that. I mean, I'd really like to take it and just, as I was saying before, just walk up to they might be odd, white people in the street and give them an example from this list and say, what do you think about that? Just engage them in a dialogue about this idea about white privilege with a concrete example. Because it's much easier, I think, for people to engage with the concept like white privilege if you give them these concrete examples. And these are all taken from real life. These are real examples that people have experienced. So there's no denying them. There's no saying it doesn't happen. Now, I'm under no illusions that lots of people will argue. Lots of people will say, as my father had to work hard to get to where he is, and I've had to work hard, and all this kind of stuff. White privilege is not saying that no white people have a hard time. White privilege is saying that white people don't have a hard time because they are white. Right? We benefit because we're white. It's the corollary. So if you, just as a simple example, any white person that comes up and says, oh, well, I've had a hard time, or my parents had a hard time, the rebuttal is, yeah, but if you were a person of colour in exactly the same social context, with exactly the same environment, you would be worse off than you are now, simply because you're white. And, as I said, so a lot of people will argue against it, but, we could run through that list and, there's 100 plus examples there. There might be some that white people would say, oh, well, that happened to me, or, but the reality is that it doesn't happen systemically. And this does happen systemically. It happens all the time.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's like I don't get randomly stopped by the police. Now, there could be a white guy with dreadlocks, who could say, well, actually, I'm always getting stopped.
Which
by
interesting you use that example,
Yeah.
because if the guy's got dreadlocks,
Yeah, exactly.
there's a racialisation process within the minds.
Well,
of the
I used to have dreadlocks, and
Right.
I used to get picked on and followed around the shops. And
So
things
you
like
know
that.
what it's
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
but that's a really interesting example, because
Yeah.
there is a racialisation process going on in the mind of the police officer, because what they're seeing are the dreadlocks, and what they're doing is unconsciously perhaps associating dreadlocks to black people, to drugs, to criminality, to whatever, because that's the racist mentality that exists there. And I mean, I don't have the list in front of me, but there are other examples. I'm sure people would say, "Oh, well, that happened to me once," or "That happened to my cousin Joe twice."
Absolutely.
But,
I mean, I can talk about white privilege without being called a racist.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's again, this is one of the reasons that I would want and try and urge other white people to get up and talk about this stuff, and talk about the systemic racism that exists in our society. Because often what happens if people of colour get up and start talking about white privilege and white, systemic racism, they will get people say, "Oh, he's just got a chip on his shoulder," or or "You're being racist towards me because you're black and I'm white," and you're like, which is it's just ridiculous. This idea that some white people have that you can have this thing called reverse racism is just a non-entity. It's ludicrous. Reverse racism doesn't exist. The key to the issue of racism are the systems of power. The fact that it's systemic, the fact that the racism that exists in this country happens to every single person of colour. It's not individualised. It's not just those two people over there or that group of people stood by the bus stop over there. It happens to every single person of colour in this country to one degree or another. And that's racism, because it's systemic and it's against entire races. Reverse racism doesn't exist, because whilst a person of colour can come up to me and call me all the names under the sun because of the colour of my skin, that's not racism in the same sense. That might be racialised prejudice because they're saying things about the colour of my skin, but it is not racism, because it does not come with this systemic power that exists within racism. And if you step back from these individualised, personalised engagements and you have a look at those systems, you have a look at the reality that people of colour are discriminated against in education, in housing, in employment, in the criminal justice system, in health, in every walk of life. If you step back from it and you look at the cultural output, when you look at the way black men and women particularly are represented in music, in TV series, in films, when you look at how Asians in particular are always represented, usually either a taxi driver or a terrorist, these are all negative representations that are all setting up people of colour as different from, as the other in relation to white people. And white people in Britain are considered the norm. We are normative. We are the norm. Okay, and everything else is judged against the standard of white. And that's racist, and that's systemic racism, and it has a system of power behind it. No person of colour can do that to me or any other white person in this country in any way whatsoever, so they cannot be racist in that way.
That's really interesting to hear, because I have on a number of occasions heard people say exactly that, that they've had inverted racism.
Doesn't exist.
Right, that's really interesting. Now, earlier you passed me something about the ongoing colonialism of whiteness.
Yeah, this was
really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that I again posted it on Facebook, but I brought it in today because I had a sense that we would be talking about some of this kind of cultural historical racism or cultural historical whiteness that I talked about before. And in particular, the discourses that have existed in our society for generations, for hundreds of years, way back to when policies and politicians were talking about colonialism and justifying it as the white man's burden and bringing civilization to the barbaric and uncivilized and exotic other and all that kind of stuff. And I just did a little bit of research looking at media advertising, commercial advertising, and this is just some examples of different adverts. The first one is about soap, and then there are others that are about skin lightening cream. And the inference behind all of this is that the lighter the skin, the more beautiful you are, or the cleaner you are. And obviously the reverse, the racist reverse, being the darker you are, the dirtier you are, the less civilized you are, the less pretty you are. And the reason that these are adverts that stem back to the 1920s and 30s right through to present day. So it's still happening.
Yeah.
It's
a massive thing. I lived in Thailand for a number of years, and all my Thai girlfriends were all lightening their faces. Yeah. They were all using this horrendous cream to bleach their faces.
Well, there was I don't know if you saw it, but it was posted, went around Facebook a lot, but there was an advert that I believe was in it was in the Far East somewhere. I'm not specifically sure which country, but it was for laundry powder. And the advert was shaking your head there, Harrow, you've seen it, right? Yeah, okay. So the advert was for laundry powder, and what you saw was this Asian woman, again, I'm not sure which country she was from, putting a black man into the washing machine with the washing powder turning the machine on to the cycle, and when it finished, she opened it up, and out came this much, much paler Asian man. Now that's today, and
I am so shocked.
I mean, it wouldn't happen here,
no,
right? But the point being that these kinds of attitudes are global as well.
It's awful, isn't it?
Yeah, it's disgusting.
Absolutely, it leaves me just speechless. It really does.
What really interests me about that, and I don't have the answers, I don't know, but what really interests me about that and about the sort of epidemic of skin lightening products and skin lightening practices in Africa and other places like that is why. Where has this perception that lighter is more beautiful come from? Now, the quick and easy answer from my perspective, particularly when we're talking about Africa and the Indian the subcontinent, the Asian subcontinent, is it comes from colonialism.
Yeah.
Because
well, my girlfriends would always say, they like, and the Thai guys would always like the big fat white girls. And I said, why? What's the attraction? What's the attraction? It's because it means money. It means money.
So I think that's there may be a different factor in that because of the wealth disparity between the West and other parts of the world, developing countries, and there is a massive wealth disparity, and so there is something going on there. But I think psychologically, this idea that white is more beautiful, or white is cleaner, or white is better, which is, as I say these things, these are just the old racist tropes that have been repeated.